Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Desire Dilemma, a podcast that amplifies immigrant voices in America. I'm Funmi Apantaku-Onayemi, your host. Attorney Chime Asonye is a public policy advisor and a 2023 Millennium Fellow. He received his law degree from Chicago's esteemed Northwestern University. He is the founder of Nigerian Mental Health, an initiative that involves more than 30 mental health organizations in Nigeria. He was born in America to Nigerian parents who raised him with Nigerian values. Growing up, he struggled with finding a comfortable space where he can fit in or call home within the Nigerian culture and the American culture. From his experiences and interactions with other immigrants, he has candid suggestions for immigrant parents on raising their children in America. Good afternoon, Chime Asonye. Thank you so much for being on Desire Dilemma. We really appreciate your time. We know that you're a very busy man, and so we'll try not to take too much of your time. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great today. It's summertime, and I'm excited to be having this conversation. Thank you for the invitation.
So that yesterday's tornado and all that storm did not bother you, did it?
It did. I don't know. I had a friend in town, and I took them out, and we actually got the tornado warnings. And so we were caught up when we were coming home, and we were seeing the trees on the ground. We saw the rain, but for individuals who are used to Chicago, we're used to a little bad weather, so we were able to brave it. And thankfully, none of the lights or anything like that went out. But I know people from around the city, they actually did have their lights go out and things like that. So we just pray everybody's safe and sound.
So, we're going to begin with this. I always like to have the background of someone, and I really would like to know about your background, especially your childhood.
Well, my name is Chime Asonye. I am a lawyer, a public policy advisor, and a health equity advocate, or you could say mental health advocate. I currently have just come from running a congressional campaign in Illinois' 7th Congressional District, which is a large part. It goes from downtown to Oak Park to as far as Austin on the south and west side. And I also run the largest multidisciplinary network of mental health practitioners and organizations in Nigeria and the diaspora. We have over 40 plus organizations. It's called Nigerian Mental Health, and we try to connect organizations to help make a transformative and sustainable impact in Nigeria's mental health landscape. And we do that through policy, research, advocacy, wellness programming, and disability inclusion work.
When I read about you, when I met you actually, and you spoke on mental health, I was quite surprised because normally, we don't talk about mental health issues in Nigeria. We do that here. Yeah, we don't. And that's a problem. So I really wondered about your discipline as an attorney and how you were able to really find room to entertain the whole idea of the Nigerian mental health.
So you asked about the childhood, and I would say that I was born in Chicago, and I think that's important to note. So I was a first generation Nigerian migrant, and I think that comes with complexities because my childhood was always very much a product of navigating my identity, navigating difference, and feeling inside and yet external at the same time. You were Nigerian, so you had your own kind of Pan-African culture, but you weren't. It's not like there's not many immigrant or Nigerian kids in your class. At least there wasn't in my case. There were more African Americans. You don't feel particularly connected because you have your own cultural mores. There's the stereotypes that exist, and there's also really elements of differentiation. So I remember being in a class growing up and a teacher walking up to me when I was leaving class and saying I was intelligent. I did well when I was in elementary school and things like that. And she pulled me to the side and she said, you're not like them. What she meant was I was not like the other Black kids. I was distinct and different, and I had maybe more potential or promise, and I needed to kind of hone in and invest in that. And so you saw this growing up in Chicago, which is one of the most hyper-segregated cities in the country. There's this constant understanding of distinction. And so I feel like I always kind of was looking for home or trying to understand what home looks like, trying to understand where I fit in this kind of tapestry of life. And I felt like because of that, I have an acute understanding of really at a younger age of some of the psychological and personal reflections that people have when they're trying to understand who they are and what they're connected to, and in my case is connected to the city, connected to my community, but also connected to the continent. We try to find our place in different settings, and where I found my place as someone who was bright, who was smart, who was motivated, was on the debate team. So I was on the debate team when I was in high school and college, and that really opened my eyes to the shores of the world, understanding the leading pressing global challenges and issues, and understanding that my universe was beyond the four walls of Lake Michigan and Chicago, but the entire globe and policy arena was really my tapestry, which is what eventually got me into the law. And in undergrad, I studied political science and philosophy. So if psychology is a personal understanding of what is going on with somebody's head or personally, I think that philosophy is kind of that understanding at the macro level, at the political level. Because of things like debate, I was really conscious not only about policy, but also what these policies told us about ourselves, about our society, about how we represent people, about who we valued. And so I've always been kind of interested in that intersection about policy, about politics, about philosophy, about representation, about who people are, about humanizing the political. And I think that that's how these kind of ideas connect, especially when I got into law school. There's these spaces that are supposed to be about policy that don't really make you feel comfortable. And to make you feel comfortable, you have to be thinking about interpersonal relationships. You have to be thinking about connection. You have to be thinking about what things stand for. And so those initial kind of mental health questions kind of came to me as, how do I humanize the political? And then as we gain more societal understanding around things like mental health, I think the language of mental health and psychological well-being and resilience and mental fortitude started coming into my lexicon. And as I kind of leaned more into it, I wanted to see what I could do on what I think is one of the biggest development challenges of our time, which is psychosocial well-being.
It's interesting that you say all of this, because actually the whole idea of the desire dilemma was built around the idea that we now have a generation of our kids who actually have this, exactly what you just described. And we as parents, we don't seem to understand that very well. I think we had a guest at one time that I asked this question, that did she feel torn between her Nigerian heritage and the American culture? And she said she didn't have that. But then I met a lot of people who said they're just kind of, you at home. The way I describe it and simplify this is, you're at home, you are almost fully Nigerian. And then you're out there in the schools and also on the playgrounds, and you have to be American. And I always wondered, what would that do to a child? For example, I have my two boys. One is a lawyer and one is a lobbyist. And and so both of them will say, Mom, talking about counseling. So we always think, what happened to you? Just because I yelled at you, what does that mean? So what I like about what you just said is that now we're having this little window of opportunity to understand what it is in terms of psychology and the effect of how we deal with our children at home and how they go out in the world and are kind of really in their own worlds, trying to find that space.
It's a huge break and disconnect. I mean, in different ways growing up, I think that Nigerian communities are a lot more sheltered. So for instance, a lot of my friends, when I was growing up, they would go to parties, they would hang out with their friends after school. That wasn't really the case in my household. We would either go home or go to after school. So that was a distinction in terms of just making that kind of connection to our populace, that kind of sheltered lifestyle in terms of protection, and you just come home and you kind of do your work. That was one thing that I thought was a big distinction. Secondly, our interests that are global aren't necessarily, now they're coming onto the fold, but soccer or football, as they call it globally, is not a huge sport here, but especially in Pan-African culture, it is. So I played soccer. And so who do people who play soccer? Maybe you have some really elite white students. Maybe you have, which is what the case when I was playing, you have some Latino kids and things like that. It's not a quote unquote black sport like basketball and football. So you're not really, even the things that you're doing paraprofessionally are not connected to predominant black and brown spaces that you would see. And then other interests like the debate team and things like that I ended up getting involved in, or even poetry that really resonated resonated to me. Those things were distinguished. I remember walking as a kid, dressed a certain way, reading a book, and then a white person walked up to me and said, you keep it up. And it was a compliment, but it was also very differentiating, because I'm sure he doesn't go over to every Black kid and say, you keep it up, because it was, a different side for him. So it was just, there was all these kind of macro things that kind of distinguished me almost and made me understand trying to look for my continued place. And so I don't think that conversation has ended. In fact, I think that that's probably one of the reasons I'm in mental health, is because this is not this is not an endpoint. Even though I'm older and I'm involved in this work, it's a journey.
Yes. As immigrant parents, did we do anything right? I mean, let's say in your childhood, for example, what did you appreciate about your upbringing?
Well, what did I appreciate about my upbringing? Okay, so is the second question after this going to say what did you guys do wrong? So I know, I know how to frame this. I think that I appreciate the discipline. We had very high standards in my household. We didn't B and A's, B and B minuses and A minuses were subjects to be disciplined. We know if we got in trouble, there's repercussions. So it wasn't a question of whether there's going to be a challenge or not. That was always going to be a challenge. We had some very strong patriarchs around in certain ways. So, and their tradition was important, whether it was family portraits that were taken to commemorate the holiday season, or it was attending my uncle's house for a celebration in terms of the Super Bowl parties and things like that. Family was very important to us. And this is family, the nuclear family, but also extended family. I thought it was important. I think that my parents at a very early age made a decision to make sure I was connected to the continent and my community. And so this is just when other social medias started to be invented a little bit later on in life. But, I went every other year or every year at one point. I was going to Nigeria for holidays or for Christmas. So I very much felt like I was connected to my ancestors, my siblings, and my cousins. And then, like, when social media and things like that continue to rise, I would get messages from them, reminding them of themselves, reminding them that they, I had cousins back there and they weren't just here. I thought that my parents, as they could, really pushed us, my siblings, in the things that we valued. So if it was a debate team, even though my dad wasn't as prominent supporter on the debate and things like that, if it was soccer or something like that, reading books. I love to read. My parents would make the investment. They would get those books for me. They would make sure that I play on the soccer team. They would make sure they would drive me to debate tournaments and things like that. So I think that some young people have interests, have thoughts, have things that they think are important, but they don't have the outlets to explore those passions. I think that those are some of the great things and kind of foundations that my parents did well to support my interest.
So what did we do wrong?
It's hard to operating with counterfactuals in terms of what was wrong or what was right. I think that's a difficult process. If I was going to be candid, my dad lives in Nigeria now, and my mom lives in America. And so I've truly had a couple decades of them living on different sides of the world. They're still married and they make that relationship work, but they've been living on different sides of the world. And I know a lot of relationships that are like that, where one partner is in Africa and one partner is in America or or a high income country like Europe or things like that. And so I do think that I would have been a different person if they were in the same place. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that I do think that it would have been good if they were both in the same household for an extended period of time. And so sometimes I felt like when there was interventions from my parents, it was an intervention because of geography. And so it's like, let me come back and fix a fire versus that kind of everyday attention that's sometimes necessary when you're a young person. I think secondly, there was I don't know, like I said, I don't know if this is good or bad, but we were sheltered. So I think that there were some friendships that maybe may have prevailed, but then also, with that also becomes risk in terms of being put in the, bad situations and things like that. So I think that there's friendships I could have formed potentially that I didn't form. And because there wasn't that, because there was a bit of that sheltering and not having the ability to kind of connect in that sense. And then the third thing is that I don't know if this is a disadvantage, and I'm not really sure about how parenting works in this way, but I think that there's something about creating the space to talk about things that you're going through and things that you're having a challenge with. And I think that that is not something that happens naturally. That has to be something that's cultivated. And so you need to feel like if you're having a challenge or issue, you can come to your parents to talk about it. And so I'm not sure if the things that are going on in my head, if I understood, whether it's about distinction and difference, I'm not really sure. And having and kind of understanding how to process the world, I'm not sure if they created the space that for me to have conversations about what I was thinking through and what I was going through. And like I said, I don't think it's their fault, but I also think that there is something that it has to be intentional. That space needs to be an intentional thing to be created for someone to feel comfortable sharing what they're going through. I think that there's a lot of positives in my childhood, and I think that there was some potential areas that I could have been adjusted a little bit to maybe help support me as I was continuing my upbringing.
As you're getting up in age, especially in America. And I think everything you said, I will imagine that most immigrant parents, especially Nigerian parents, will actually identify with the fact that we don't actually open up and we don't really know I'm not sure whether we allowed our children to actually come and say, Mom, this happened to me in school. Mom, I saw that it happened to another kid. And this is what I'm thinking about it. I think you're right about communication, that we didn't do that well. Secondly, I think because we don't understand the power of interventions, meaning that the whole idea of schools in America having this room where they have counselors to intervene in whatever our kids are going through. It's like, what's wrong with him? Oh, he slept in school, so what? Maybe he was tired. And we don't really sit back to really understand what that is. So I appreciate your transparency in that area, because you got it actually. Everything you said about making friends, communicating with parents. Now, at this point in my life, I'm beginning to feel as if we failed our children in that area. To our audience, I'm taking this opportunity to extend my special appreciation for your support of Desire Dilemmas Season 2. This episode, episode 11, will serve as the second to the last episode of this season. Please join us for episode 12, which will be the last episode of Season 2, as we return with our conversations with Attorney Chime Asonye in Part 2. You all have been wonderful and supportive of our podcast. We appreciate you tremendously. We want you to share our podcast. We also want you to call us or go on our website, desiredilemma.com, for more episodes. Thank you so much for being with us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.